So before we go through the process of duplicating our baseline machines that we're going to use for putting SQL Server and terminal services on for our demo environment, we actually need to go and build an additional virtual machine, and that's going to be the main virtual machine that we're using for all of our collaboration components that we're going to be demonstrating as part of our SAP Business One demonstration environment. And what we're going to put on that is we're going to put on Small Business Server 2008. And that's going to host our SharePoint, it's going to host all of our domain services and everything we need, to form the baseline of what we would like to see a small business deploy as the main component in their IT infrastructure, because that's a great platform for SAP Business One to sit on top of and to utilize some of that functionality like the SharePoint portal server, or in this case actually the SharePoint services that's part of Small Business Server 2008. So we're going to go in here and we're going to say new. We're going to create a new virtual machine. And this is the same process that we just went through to create our baseline machines, except in this case I'm going to call it Small Business Server 2008 Demo Server. Now you can call it whatever you want, it's totally up to you. And the other alternative, or the other choice you have, is if you think you're going to need to have multiple of these, you can go through the same process here. You can do this install and then you can park it as a baseline machine to come back to and make duplicates from. Alright, so that's something that you're able to do. So we're going to store the virtual machine again in a different location, and now it's remembered where our baseline VMs were. And that's okay. We could leave it there. In my case though, I am going to go back to my D drive and I'm going to put this into another folder, and I'm going to call this my live virtual machine. So let me just go and create that folder. So I've just created that folder, and we'll go back and we'll browse again, except this time actually what I've decided to call the folder is production VMs. So I'm going to create it in here, and I'll select that folder, so that's all good. Now with Small Business Server, you need an absolute bare minimum of 4 gig of RAM. I like to run it with 8, so I'm going to allocate 8096. So I'm going to allocate 8 gig of RAM to this virtual machine. Now this is why it's important to have a virtual machine host that's got about 32 gig of RAM, so you can run these bigger size virtual machines, and you can run multiples. I'll say next. I'm going to attach it to my virtual network A, and I'll say next. I'm going to create a new virtual hard disk, and I'm happy with the name of that. 127 gigabytes is fine in terms of the required size. I'll say next. I want to install an operating system, and same process. I'm going to pick it from my ISOs, and you'll see I actually have my Small Business Server. And which one do I want? So I want Small Business Server, and this is the one here, and I'll choose that file. I'll say next, and that's it. I'll click finish, and we'll give that a second. It's creating our virtual machine, and there it is, our Small Business Server 2008 demo server. It's sitting there ready to start up, and I'm going to go ahead and start that up. So I've started that up, and it's now going through the installation process. Same scenario as installing Windows Server 2008 R2, because fundamentally Small Business Server starts off by doing a Windows Server install. So again, same process, and in this case again English Australia. I'll say next. I'll choose to install now. Now, a couple of things that I've decided to do with my demonstration environment that I want to talk about. By the way, with your product key, you can use your product key now that you've got with your Microsoft Action Pack subscription, or you can leave the product key blank. The installation will still go ahead. What I've decided to do in order to make my demos very, very effective is I've gone out and I've actually registered a company name, OEC Computers, and I've also registered the domain name, oeccomputers.com. So I've got all of those, the necessary websites, the necessary domain names and everything all registered and running, so I can go ahead and run a full demonstration environment and show all of the different components that I want to, and actually put this entire demonstration environment up live on the internet so I can access it in real time. You can choose to do the same thing. Find yourself a company name and create your own virtual company around that. Matter of fact, I would recommend you do that, but again, it's totally up to you as to which approach you take. So I'm going to accept those license terms. That's why you'll see when I'm going through setting up Small Business Server and it starts asking me about the company, I've got all that information there ready, and I've got the domain name and everything, and I own that domain name, so I can use that without any fear of having to or of encountering any kind of intellectual property issue. So I'm going to do a custom install. There's my disk 0 allocated space, and I'm going to accept that. I'm going to say next. And so same thing now, I'm going to pause this process just while this basics of the installation goes ahead, and then we'll come back when it starts to get interesting and we have to provide some feedback again. So that process has now gone through, it's finished copying all the files and it's rebooted for the very first time. So the Small Business Server startup process is now going on to the next step. So we'll just let that go ahead. You can see we've got the same process happening here. It's now completing the installation. One more reboot to go through, and then we'll get into the actual configuration of the Small Business Server components. So now that reboot's complete, you can see the Small Business Server installation wizard's kicked in, and it's going to ask us to go through and configure all the details. So we want to verify the clock and time zone settings, and you can see I'm going to have to just move around a little bit here to make sure I can capture everything from a screen recording perspective. So it's automatically picked up where I am, the date, and so on. So that's all good. So I'll say OK. So we've double checked that. I'll say next. Now it's going to ask me, do I want to go online and get the most recent installation updates? In this case, I'm going to say yes, I do want to do that. So the ideal scenario here is that as you're going through this installation, that you do have your virtual server connected to a network that has internet connectivity. That way you're going to make sure that you get the very latest updates. So now it's asking me to put in my business name. So this is OEC Computers. And then it's going to ask me to put in all of my company details. Just for now though, I'm just going to put in the country. But at some stage you will need to come back in and put in all of the associated name and address details. Then you'll see it automatically tries to allocate a server name. So I'm going to call this OEC Small Business Server. And you can see that once I type in there OEC Small Business Server, and you can see it's automatically tried to pick an internal domain name which is based on the company name, and that's okay by me. I'm going to leave that as it is, and I'll say next. So these are now being locked in and cannot be changed. I'm going to create my administrator account. And I just like my administrator accounts to be simple, just my first name. I'm going to put in a password. Now you can install Forefront Security for Exchange Server if you want to. Personally, I've actually got a full license for the Symantec endpoint protection, so I'm going to drop back after this and I'm going to install Symantec endpoint protection on this server and all of the other virtual servers as I'm setting them up. It's up to you which way you want to do that. So I'm going to switch that off. There's all my settings. My server name is OEC Small Business Server. My internal domain name is OEC Computers. My network administrator account name is Richard, and my company name is OEC Computers, and that's it. So then I'm going to go ahead and say next. And now Small Business Server is going to go ahead and it's going to do everything else that I need. It's going to set up Exchange Server, it's going to set up SharePoint services, it's going to create my intranet, it's going to set up all of my remote desktop gateway services. It's basically going to do everything that I need, and that's one of the reasons why Small Business Server is such a great platform for a small business and such a great platform on which to build your SAP Business One deployments. So we're going to let that run. I'm going to come back in at the end when that's all done with some final comments, and then we can go ahead and move on to the next stage of duplicating our baseline servers and then taking those duplicated servers and joining them to this new domain. After we've then done that, what we'll do is we'll go through, we'll install SQL Server and SAP Business One, and I'm going to install SAP Business One 8.81, so we're working with the very latest version of the software, and we're also going to configure all the components we need for the mobility piece so we can immediately plug in our iPad and iPhone and start demoing the new SAP Business One mobility apps with our demo environment. So now the Small Business Server installation is finished. The server basically has gone through and done everything that is needed to get to this point now. I didn't have to interact with the server at all. It's restarted once or twice, and now I'm presented with this screen telling me that I have a successful installation. I'm able to now start using the server, and I can click here. I've resized the screen down to 800 by 600, not the most ideal resolution, but just for the purposes of this recording, so you can see what's going on. I've resized it down to that level. So a couple of things we're going to do next is we're going to load up all of the updates to Windows Small Business Server 2008 that we need. And then we're also going to go through the process of getting this server connected to the internet, configuring the server backup, and so on. And we'll do that in one of our next sessions.